Thank you very much for joining us for the second of our online poster sessions for this conference. My name's Jen Lucy, and I'll be your chair for today. We have a fantastic breadth of topics from all over the world today. What we'll do is start with a theme of agriculture and NbS, and then the next section will take us to nature-based solutions for coastal areas. Then we'll find out more about an initiative for helping people engage with nature and finish up with asking about how we can finance nature-based solutions. What we'll do is we'll give each speaker 5 minutes to tell us about their poster, and then we will have hopefully around 20 minutes of Q&A after we've heard from all the speakers. But please add your questions to the Q&A, not the chat, because they'll get lost in amongst the chat. But if you add them to the Q&A as you think them up as they're speaking, and we can collect them together and address them at the end. First up, we have Iris Berger from the University of Cambridge, and she'll be talking to us about whether agroecological intensification can help us meet food, livelihood and conservation challenges in Indonesia. Iris, you have the floor.
Right. So first of all, it's in India, but no worries. Almost in the same region. Okay. So ultimately, we must fundamentally change the way we produce food if we're able to meet numerous global sustainability and climate and biodiversity targets. And the challenge is, however, that trade-offs between food production, socioeconomic outcomes, and biodiversity conservation are prevalent in existing land systems around the world. So, for example, the relationship between agricultural productivity and farmland biodiversity tends to be negative a lot more of the time than the synergies. And if and how such trade-offs can be overcome remains largely unknown. Agroecological intensification could be a key strategy because it aims to deliver high yields through improving nature's contribution to food production, therefore creating agricultural landscapes that are less hostile to biodiversity and allow food demand to be met in relatively small areas, so freeing up space for natural ecosystems as well. And we study the impacts of what is currently the largest agroecological transition globally, zero-budget natural farming, ZBNF, in Andhra Pradesh, South India. And zero budget refers to the intention of drastically reducing the need for financial inputs and therefore ending the farmer's dependence on agricultural credit. And natural farming refers to the aim of regenerating biotic interactions and underpinning these sort of yield-supporting ecosystem services by using locally available non-synthetic ingredients to make bioinoculants. And the government of Andhra Pradesh is aiming to convert all 6 million farmers in the state to ZBNF by 2030. So in order to quantify the causal impact of the Andhra ZBNF program on biodiversity, crop yields and profit, we need to know what the outcomes would have been had there not been a transition to ZBNF. So in other words, we need to estimate the counterfactual outcome. The challenge is that the ZBNF program was not randomly rolled out, but farmers chose whether or not to adopt ZBNF. So there are lots of potentially confounding factors that affect the likelihood of ZBNF adoption, as well as the outcome variables of interest. So we use statistical matching to identify agrochemical farming landscapes with similar biophysical and socioeconomic characteristics in comparison to the ZBNF sites. So to assess the impact of the ZBNF program on yield and profit, we interviewed farmers at each site. And we found that the ZBNF program did not affect crop yields, but it increased economic profit by over 200% on average. And that boost in profit is primarily driven by lower input costs. So then to assess the ZBNF, the impact of the ZBNF program on birds, we conducted point counts over 2 years and used distance sampling to estimate individual species population densities, and that then fitted Bayesian models post-matching. And we found that the ZBNF program improved bird community integrity, which we measured as the Bray-Curtis similarity index between each farming system and forest. And then when we look at population density shifts at the trophic guild level, so grouping species by the diet, we can see that granivores and omnivores, so species that feed primarily on seeds and species with very broad diets, did not change in density due to the ZBNF program. However, invertebrates, so species that feed on insects, and vertebrates, so species that feed on mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, and frugivores, so fruit-eating birds, all increased in density in response to the ZBNF program. Invertebrates also feed on agricultural pests, so ZBNF farmers might benefit from increased pest control service provisioning. And frugivores are important seed dispersers and could help restore native and semi-native vegetation in agricultural landscapes. At the species level, you can see that there's an overall trend towards higher population densities in response to the ZBNF program, but there's a lot of uncertainty, and we can only really be confident for a few species that the densities did increase in response to ZBNF. So we found that the ZBNF program has not led to yield penalty, but it has had some farmland bird conservation benefits. However, there could still be trade-offs between landscape level yield and bird densities. And we found that this was the case in agrochemical systems, so where the density of omnivores, invertebrates, and frugivores declined with increasing landscape level yield. In ZBNF systems, however, there was no negative density yield relationships at the guild level, and the number of species with negative density yield curves was over 3/4 less than that in agrochemical systems. So in conclusion, we demonstrate the effectiveness of the ZBNF program in delivering considerable livelihood and some bird conservation benefits. ZBNF was partially able to overcome trade-offs between agricultural productivity and farmland biodiversity. And lastly, crucially, the ZBNF program did not lower landscape level yield, meaning that no additional land needs to be converted to agriculture to meet food production targets. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Iris. Next up, we have Annalisa Okinyu from the University of Nairobi and ICRA, and she'll be talking to us about agroforestry for arid regions in Kenya.
Thank you very much, Jen. As you have heard, my name is Annalisa from Kenya. I am going to be speaking about my poster. This is some work I did on agroforestry in the arid and semi-arid savannas. So my topic is agroforestry, a plausible nature-based solution for climate change adaptation and livelihood improvement in Tana River Sub-County, Kenya. So just to explain to you what my study site looks like. In the savannas, we have the arid and semi-arid lands, and the communities that are found in these places, most of them are pastoralists, and the pastoralists, some of them are nomads. Some of them try to practice agriculture, but their major way of life is pastoralism. So I did my study in this area, and in these arid and semi-arid lands, these are places that are vulnerable to desertification, land degradation, and the adverse effects of climate change. We also have unpredictable rainfall. We also have drought, which has made it very difficult for food production, and even the income sources are very limited. So in this place, it's hard to cope with the challenges of climate change like any other places. So to address these challenges, the county government came up with the County Integrated Development Plan, and they have the goal of promoting agroforestry and a green economy to be able to adapt to climate change. So when I did my study, I wanted to know what are the perceived impacts of climate change on the livelihoods of these farmers. What do they think climate change is to them? And to also explore the sustainable agroforestry systems that they have, and whether that would be a possible strategy to help them cope with the effects of climate change. So just to explain, agroforestry is the integration of trees within farming system in a nutshell. And my major objectives were to characterize the agroforestry systems practiced in the Tana River Sub-County, and to determine the perceived impacts of climate change on farmers' livelihoods. And third was to determine the contribution of agroforestry systems that are in practice to livelihood improvement in the county. So the methods I used, I did household surveys where I was comparing farmers who practice agroforestry and those who do monocropping. And then I did key informant interviews. These were basically the leaders in the area, the elders, the county officials, the government officials. I also did focus group discussions with the farmers. And we also had a geospatial analysis where I did temperature and precipitation data. I analyzed that, and land use, land cover imagery. So some of the results I came with in the top right, most of the climate change impacts that are prevalent in the areas that the farmers had recalled first was drought, the strong winds, floods, and extreme temperatures. And it's important to note that some of the farmers, they would understand climate change in its term, but some of them would not. So they would just explain them in forms of drought. We have not seen drought, or the precipitation patterns are shifting. We used to plant in this month, but nowadays it's different. They would talk about the floods. And funny enough is that this place, it doesn't rain, it receives minimal rainfall, but because it rains in the highlands of the country, so upstream, all the water just comes and floods their farms. So it's a very sad situation that, yes, you do not receive rain, but here you go, you got the floods. And extreme temperatures is another. So I couldn't fit all my data in this one slide, but in case of more information, you can hit me up on LinkedIn at Annalisa Claire. And this is the temperature anomaly series. We did a 40-year anomaly series for temperature and precipitation data. And as you can see, the trend is increasing, and this is the same in relation to precipitation. And the most important findings is that, first of all, droughts, floods, strong winds, and extreme temperatures were the major forms of climate change. They also talked about precipitation patterns that are different. So in these areas, the county government has set up irrigation schemes, which to help the farmers try and plant crops. And so as I was doing the study between the different the agroforestry farmers and the monocropping, the ones practicing monocropping. First of all, I found that the most practiced agroforestry systems, we have agri-silvipastoral and agri-silvicultural. As I mentioned, they're pastoralists, so they grow trees, they grow crops, and they also keep livestock. And agri-silvicultural, some of them just grow trees and crops, and they do not have livestock. So this helps them to with the productive and protective functions that agroforestry trees bring. And also, if you see the difference now I was checking the livelihood difference between the monocroppers and the agroforesters, they will explain to you even in their late terms that during drought and floods, you'll find that the floods will come and flood the farms, and all their crops will be gone. During drought, all their crops will dry up in the farm. But you'll find that the farmers that practice agroforestry, their trees would be resilient because the government is trying to help them to plant drought-resilient trees. So we have some mango varieties that are drought-resilient. We have cashews, which do very well in these dryland savannas. And so they are advantaged because they are able to find an alternative source of food, an alternative source of income during this drought and floods during this climate. So this helps them to adapt to the climate change. So that was my presentation. And this brings me to my conclusion that yes, agroforestry is a plausible nature-based solution for climate change adaptation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Annalisa. Don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A to ask at the end for Annalisa and Iris. Next up, we have Amy Sun from Utrecht University talking about understanding unintended outcomes from agroforestry in Indonesia. Amy, off you go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy. So let's talk a little bit about this research background. Despite a lot of promising future that NbS could deliver, there are also some shortcomings. For example, climate mitigation practices could shift pressure from climate change to other problems such as biodiversity loss or freshwater use. So the purpose of this research is to investigate the existence of the problem-shifting outcome, addressing the causal link whereby the NbS implementation could lead to problem shifting. So problem shifting is it happens when you try to fix a problem with some measurements, but then you did not fix the problem, or you did fix the problem, but in the end, it leads to some other problems. So this research question is, does the implementation of NbS practices from the NbS enterprise lead to unintended consequence of problem shifting? If yes, how and why? And how I do this research is through the data from the company, using thematic analysis and interviews from also the company documents as the data. And I want to talk a little bit about the company's project aim. So they're doing regenerative agroforestry in Indonesia based on these 3 project sites, namely Kalimantan, Sumatra, and Java. So they want to support smallholders' livelihood through off-taking their farming product, and to simplify the value chain, crossing out the layers of middlemen. And there are some of the results, key results from this finding. I found that the flexibility in the definition of nature-based solution and its wide applicability lead to problem shifting. So how this problem shifting is happening is through 4 pathways. The first one is the attempt to fulfill market demand. So for example, the use of agricultural inputs such as fertilizers or the herbicides, pesticides could lead to problem shifting. And the need to secure funding. So another example is the company, they're in the really important stage of their development. So sometimes they will use beneficial framing to make the funding proposal more appealing to the investors. And the third one is the management of project implementation. So this project is implemented in Indonesia, and the company, they are mainly from people in the Western country, but also with stakeholders in Indonesia. So sometimes miscommunication could happen between different stakeholders. And the fourth is the prioritization of different objectives. So this company, they are prioritizing the farmer's livelihood over environmental benefits. And also, sometimes the aims of the involving stakeholders, such as the company, the NGO involved, or cooperative farmers, or even local community, they have different aims, which makes this project lead to unintended consequences. So these are my conclusion. First, the flexibility in defining the term NbS and its framing are critical to the occurrence of problem shifting. Second, the wide applicability of NbS allows organizations to decide their preferable objectives and practices. And third, nature is under extreme circumstances, nature could become the instrument for organizations or people to utilize. And then I want to bring up some discussion about this. NbS projects often have multiple objectives and in several aspects, but it's nearly impossible to focus on them equally at the same time. And then there are always priorities among different objectives, such as the company, they want to gain trust, and economic value from the project is often prioritized. And then with more stakeholders involved in the NbS projects, there are often more complexities, and these could even bring to more inefficiencies and then unintended consequences. So if you have any questions, feel free to connect me on LinkedIn or just email me with your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. So now we are moving away from agriculture to the coastal areas. Do we have Alexia online?
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk a little bit more about applying a DAPSI worm framework to the Coastbuster concept. So nature-based solutions, they can be applied, as you know, to alleviate negative human impacts on ecosystems and promote the general health or well-being of the environment. So human-induced activities, including the installations, of course, of nature-based solutions, are governed by legislative requirements like environmental impact assessments, and especially when such activities occur in marine protected areas. So a correct and thorough description of the legislative framework governing the application and development of nature-based solutions is therefore essential. We want to introduce the driver activities, pressure, state change, impacts on human welfare responses using measures, or close the DAPSI worm framework. It's available when environmental assessment procedures, including a nature-based solution, as well as when policy and industry require guidance for the practical application of a nature-based solutions concept. So in this study, we applied this DAPSI worm framework to the coastbuster approach, in which we want to introduce the mussel beds and a tube worm aggregation, the Laniche conchilega, and they are installed in the Belgian part of the North Sea with the aim of improving coastal resilience and maritime infrastructure works. So within the context of the coastbuster approach, the various elements of this DAPSI worm framework will completely elucidate it. The coastal defense, as you can see, is a driver, and with the activities including the integration of coastal infrastructure and aquaculture practices. So the pressures, they were related to the activities on the benthic habitats, and they were described using the Maresa sensitive approach. The state change assessments, I think for the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So the state change assessments, they were performed based on various marine legislations, the Marine Strategic Framework Directive, the Habitat Directive, the Water Framework Directive, and together they outline a precise set of criteria and indicators designed to assess the sustainability and health of the ecosystems. So the present study provides a detailed framework for the environmental evaluation of a seaward nature-based solution, from the state changes to the impacts on human welfare, whereby 3 quantitative estimations of the ecosystem service indicators were made: the coastal protection, the carbon retention, and as well the water quality regulation, and with the indicators quantified by in situ measurements, of course, and data from literature. So further, the 10-tenet approach for taking measures were used, like for example, using biodegradable material, but also working with local species. And they were developed as responses to facilitate the optimal implementation of a nature-based solution. The approach outlined in this study can be further used as a guide for stakeholders as they move through the environmental evaluation process that are required for successful development of a seaward nature-based solution. Our results underscore the importance of a favorable institutional environment for a nature-based solution, and we suggest that the public acceptance and stakeholder involvement, they play a crucial role in successful implementing as such a solution. So this study contributes to the understanding and operationalization of a nature-based solution in coastal management. And I want to thank you for your guidance and also in listening to this poster. And if further connection wants to be made, you can look me up in LinkedIn. So I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexa. That was fantastic. Audience, don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A for all the speakers that we've heard from so far. Next, we're staying with coastal nature-based solutions, and Dilali Tunyo from the University of Cape Coast is going to talk to us about community preferences for mangrove management in Ghana.
Okay, sorry, because of my internet interruptions, I can't on my video. So I'm presenting on the preferences for nature-based solution to coastal zone protection in Ghana, and I'm considering a mangrove forest management. So actually, this idea came up with the issue of climate change, on how to address and adapt to climate change, as well as protect the livelihoods of those along the coast of Ghana. So mangrove forests, as we all know, play a global and a vital role for coastal communities, especially by providing essential coastal ecosystem services, such as provisional, supporting, regulating, and cultural services. Ghana, in its instance, along the coast, in the coast of Ghana, almost every town has a mangrove forest, and the degradation rates is increasing. But looking at the face of COP 2030 and also UNEP and FAO, which came up with a UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration from 2021 to 2030, there is a need for us to restore and conserve the mangrove forests we have along our coast in order to protect the livelihoods and properties of the communities along the coastal communities. So the graph we see below, which is in figure 1, is showing the gap in literature for Africa especially. And Ghana, in its sense, also contributes massively to mangrove trees. There are a lot of mangrove areas in our country, especially in West Africa. We also have a lot of mangrove, but in terms of evaluation, which comes in economic terms, evaluation studies have been limited and restricted. And that is where I find my gap in undertaking the community preferences for mangrove forest management in coastal communities in Ghana using the district choice experiment. The reason for this particular topic, it's also because of the current situations or surroundings along the coastal zone. So looking at my study, I am going to apply the district choice experiment instead of the contingent valuation because it gives a space for the people to really appreciate the functions of mangrove because that is what is going to contribute for their attributes. So I undertook a focus group discussion, and the attributes that stands out for the people in their communities after discussion were the fish breeding and nursery grounds, the biodiversity, shoreline erosion protection, area restore, and then the conservation or restoration fee, which contributes the attributes, and levels will be assigned to these attributes. And then another alternatives will be generated, which will be 3, and then experimental design will be used to generate the choice cards for the survey. So in terms of sampling size, when it comes to the sample size, I'm taking it from 2 main regions which have a lot of has the largest number of sites, mangrove sites actually along the coastal regions. So I'm considering the central and Volta regions where I'll be taking 400 respondents from each regions, and also in terms of the conservation fee, I'm considering both monetary and labor or non-monetary sources because in terms of when it comes to my country, the level or the standard of living here is very low. And in fact, when it comes to poverty in our part of the world, especially those along the coast, it will be difficult for them to appreciate their contribution through monetary instead of using their labor. I think labor contribution in Africa is more appreciable more than that of the monetary contribution. So in restoring or conserving mangrove, it's a form of supporting and reducing the costs which would be involved in undertaking such projects in the country. So a multi-stage sampling technique will be adopted, and then the multinomial logic and random parameter model will be used to estimate the results. So I expect that at the end of my study, I should be able to get or provide an understanding of the community's awareness towards climate change, because part of my survey, I'm going to look at climate issues, how they understand climate change, and who they think is responsible and who they think is responsible for adapting and mitigating climate change. And also, I will estimate how much communities are willing to pay for restoration or conservation of mangrove, and also their perception and attitudes towards mangrove forests, and why I think they should be able to adapt, to be able to conserve, and then be able to adapt and mitigate climate change, and then the issues that surround their livelihoods. And also, I'll be able to look at the differences that rise up between the monetary and the non-monetary payments. So what are the implications? The implications is to provide a baseline support for conservation strategies and policies, and also ensure sustainable management of mangrove forests in Ghana, and also promote nature-based solutions, since in our current government, there is only the engineering solutions that they are trying to come up with, as a result of coastal erosion that is going on along the coastal communities. And then they are also experiencing flooding and other issues. So I hope that this study will be able to bring to light an appreciation of nature-based solutions, which have a multiple benefits to those along the coast. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next we move on to Juliana Gatti from the Living Trees Institute, and we're going to take a different, find out a bit more about their work on enhancing public engagement with nature in Brazil. Juliana, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you so much, everyone participating on this session. I represent the Living Trees Institute in Brazil. We are based in São Paulo, one of the biggest cities in the world. And here we face many important gaps on our connection to nature, since our urban infrastructure and citizens from Brazil are around 80% already living in urban settings, in a very poor green infrastructure, in a condition that brings threats to their health, quality of life, and also the perception that we are one with nature. So Living Trees Institute is born on the spring of 2006, and we have been, as an initiative, working towards bringing society connected to nature since that period, engaging children and adolescents institutions in schools, health centers, community centers, also hospitals and social assistance institutions, where we can promote the implementation of our program, which is called Living and Learning with Nature. This program has a methodology that is based on first diagnosis of the territory where the institution is located. And in the second stage, we go through a training with the professionals from the perspective of the approaches they have towards the children and adolescents. So if it's a school, we will bring more information on nature-based pedagogy. If it's a hospital or health center, we will bring more information on interventions on nature-based approaches. And we also talk a lot about the infrastructure and how these territories where the institutions are installed, they can be greener, have blue and green infrastructure, have more trees around the place, so they can have lower pollution, better soundscaping, and more opportunities to bring an agenda and interventions with the students, curriculum-based or just free time spent connected with biodiversity, which is native to the region where the institution is located. Brazil is a very huge country, so the perception, we have more than 6 biomes. I'm not sure how much you understand about our ecology, but it's a very rich environment in natural settings and landscape and biodiversity in all aspects. So the development of our methodology has brought a particular approach that can be scaled and multiplied independently on which biome or region we are. So if we apply, we have technology a social technology that can be applied on an ocean setting, or a lake or rivers or mountains or the savannas or the rainforests. We have been doing many partnerships with public sector, private sector, to implement these opportunities of bringing the diagnosis, the training, and the awareness with children and nature in these institutions. So our team can go and offer the methodology, and then after collect the information from the implementation, as these both professionals and children and adolescents, they create a vision of transformation of their territory. And we help them to do the first implementation of this transformation, bringing many different mediator, how can I say that in English? It's like instruments that will help them to engage more into natural areas activities. What else can I bring here for you? We are now at this moment just delivering a project connected to climate and health issues here in São Paulo. We have a very, as you might know, here in Brazil, we have a very strong situation on social economical vulnerabilities, and most of the population don't have equal access to green areas and sanitation or even good environment living conditions. So our project called Climate and Health to listen the voices and the visions from adolescents. It's a partnership with the Public Secretariat of Health here in our state of São Paulo. And we have applied for more than 200 participants, 100 unique participants, 200 in total, engaging in 3 opportunities of learning workshops where they could build up the information on climate and how climate affects their health. And they get to know this information better and also create proposals for public advocacy and also companies on how they can change the reality of their territories on the place they live and they study or go for health issues. So we are now transforming all these materials. This methodology will be published for multiplication and upscaling the methodology nationally, but also internationally. So we are open for partnerships with other institutions, and we are collecting the results and building up materials to have advocacy influence in climate proposals in our country and in the world. As an NGO, formalized NGO, we are also collaborating nationally and internationally with coalitions and networks that are, for example, working on climate, children and adolescents, climate situations. We have contributed to the General Comment 26, which is a document that brings the importance of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment for all children based on their rights, human rights. And also we are collaborating in the National Council of Environment in Brazil and locally in São Paulo in the Councils of Sustainable Development and Mobility, but looking especially into the health and environmental impacts. So this is a little bit of our contributions as an NGO. I am totally available to talk to you further on our projects and how we do methodologies to bring some aspects that I wrote here on the poster based on empathy and also on this diagnosis and methodology to apply and develop afterwards a network with all institutions that we are partners around the country. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Juliana. That's really interesting. We now move on to our final talk. So please do get your Q&As, questions for the Q&A into the Q&A box. Our final speaker is Laura Doughty from WWF UK, talking about catalyzing finance for forest restoration in Indonesia and Brazil. Laura, off you go.
Very much, Jen. And just to jump in, on the poster here today, I've only got the work in Brazil represented, but happy to speak to the work in Indonesia as well. So hi everyone, I'm Laura Doughty. I'm the Forest Restoration Catalyst Manager based at WWF UK. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of Trillion Trees. So it's a partnership between BirdLife International, the Wildlife Conservation Society and WWF. And it's a partnership that was forged to accelerate the protection, the improved management and restoration of forests in those places that is needed the most. Sorry, Jen, if you can move to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So we know that forests are vital to delivering on goals for people, nature and climate as represented in global targets. So I'm going to just skip to the linkages between the forest landscape restoration, which is the focus of our catalyst, and NbS. So given the significant commonality of design principles between forest landscape restoration and NbS standards and guidance, we see that an appropriately designed forest landscape restoration intervention as a pathway to implementing high quality NbS focus on deforested and degraded forest landscapes. As a reminder, forest landscape restoration aims to restore at scale deforested and degraded forest landscapes to regain ecosystem integrity, enhance biodiversity, enhance human well-being, all while contributing to climate change mitigation. We also know that we need much more investment into forest landscape restoration and NbS to be able to scale to impact. And it is estimated that we need $30 to $80 billion per year to meet the bond challenge of restoring 350 million hectares. So we know that we need more of the private sector to start investing more in NbS to be able to meet these targets. But there are significant barriers, many of which that we've heard over the last few days, to unlocking the finance required. Those include the need for an enabling policy and equitable governance, the need for recognised frameworks for good practice and accepted metrics for impact for people, nature and climate, and also the need for feasibility assessments and business modelling that can demonstrate how nature-based outcomes can be translated into value, not just financial, but also social and for nature. You can move to the next slide, please, Jen. Thank you. So the forest restoration catalyst came from the recognition that in order to meet those global, but also organizational targets, there is a need to accelerate and scale our restoration efforts, and that we need to do so in an equitable and inclusive manner at landscape scale. So the Forest Restoration Catalyst provides catalytic funding to forest restoration initiatives that have potential for long-term and sustainable financial models. So with Catalyst support, we aim to create enabling environments for nature-based investment by co-designing initiatives with local stakeholders, supporting landscape scale partnerships, and ensuring equitable benefit sharing models that are the foundation of any investment. So we provide grant and technical support through 3 stages, which we term feasibility, investment readiness, and acceleration, which are the pillars you see in this diagram, to develop those sustainable and blended revenue streams. So through those stages, we work closely with our landscape partnerships to identify key pathways across 3 work streams that together create those enabling conditions and environment for nature-based investment by co-designing the initiative with local stakeholders, key actors in the landscape, by supporting pilot projects and ensuring that we have those equitable benefit sharing models that are the foundation of the investments coming into the landscape. We also have a focus on delivering high quality FLR, scaling best practice, all underpinned by environmental safeguard frameworks, and also robust monitoring, evaluation and learning. All of this is with the aim to developing landscape-specific financial models and structures to scale restoration from small, discrete interventions to coordinated landscape-wide implementation. So we expect these models to leverage blended financing opportunities, such as outcome-based payments, payment for ecosystem services, commodity supply chain insetting and development, as well as working to increase access to public funds that are typically not accessed for restoration. So in order to test this model for the catalyst, we're delivering a pilot in the Atlantic forest in Brazil. So our pilot has been co-developed with the landscape through a participatory process to ensure that we create a mechanism that is suitable in practice and that is focused on bringing impact and benefit that the landscape needs. So the Upper Paraná in Brazil is a heavily deforested area, but in Brazil, there's the opportunity to implement restoration in line with legally mandated targets, particularly in riparian areas. So here we're looking at scaling mechanisms and the development of phased and long-term opportunities to leverage payment for ecosystem services, outcome-based payments, and also the application of agroforestry and enterprise, as well as supply chain insetting. So with Brazil and its key restoration partners in the landscape, we'll be laying the groundwork to develop those scaling mechanisms, understand the governance requirements for those mechanisms, to scale the best practice, but also leverage increased finance into the Upper Paraná to start with, and then with a view to scale more widely across the Tri-National Alliance for Restoration in that area, which includes Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. This area is a UN Decade flagship, UN Decade for Restoration flagship landscape, So there are already systems and governance frameworks in place to help us reach those targets. I'm going to stop there. I think I'm at time, but yes, very happy to take your questions. Thank you, Jen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Let me stop sharing so we can see everybody. If you'd like to turn your cameras on, if you're able and the internet connection will allow. We've got about just over 10 minutes for questions. Thank you very much to the audience for sending them in. I'd like to start with Iris, please. A question for you. So Iris, there's been quite a lot of scientific evidence build up as to the kind of to show that organic farming often produces lower yields than conventional farming techniques, and we haven't quite got to the stage where organic options can meet those kind of chemical applications. So what do you think is happening in your study where you found that there wasn't a difference? Is that to do with the particular management techniques, or is it to do with a lack of training or understanding about conventional farming in the area? What do you think is causing that?
Probably a mix of things. So in my study, I didn't look at organic farming as well. Some other people have looked, have done field plot experiments, so yeah, managed more areas of land by few square meters comparing organic ZBNF and agrochemical conventional farming. And they did see a drop in yield for organic farming as well, but that ZBNF was the same or even higher in agrochemical farming, depending on the crop, depending on the region, because obviously Andhra Pradesh is a big state in itself. So it is a different management option, and there is a particular focus on improving yield. I think so I'm not a soil scientist, but some people sort of hypothesize that ZBNF particularly increases soil moisture holding capacity, which especially in the dry areas of Andhra Pradesh is obviously very important for some of the growing season. And in terms of when you compare it, sort of what your counterfactual system is, I've sort of subsidized my data as well, so looking at, okay, well, is there only benefit in sort of the more tribal areas where there's sort of low input, various subsistence systems, and then separately into either high agrochemical input where the farmers are wealthier and have a lot of access to technologies and capital. And surprisingly, I didn't find there was a difference again. So again, no drop in yield. The other thing is the effects are obviously on average. So as an individual farmer, you might have a drop in yield, you might have a benefit in yield. So this is obviously just across, so the whole system. There's like, no near plenty, but ultimately there's a lot of research to be done. So it's a massive policy decisioning and massive transition happening right now, but they went ahead with the policy, and now it's only sort of evidence of starting to trickle in and people doing the research really. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to sort of disentangle a bit more the sort of the mechanisms behind this. But yeah, ultimately there is a big focus improving soil quality and below ground ecosystem services. Yeah, so basically I'm not quite sure why it's so much better, but yeah, there's a lot of training happening, so it's a bit more organized versus organic. It is controversial for partially because it's such an umbrella term and there's so much variation of how it's actually managed in reality.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really fascinating area. Where should we go next? Let's go to Laura next. I've got a question for you. So longevity, it's always really challenging for financing conservation projects, and it's especially important for nature-based solutions in terms of long-term carbon storage and biodiversity recovery. So is there something about your approach and the elements of the way you're looking to finance that really speaks to that sort of need for long-termism and how we might achieve that?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Yes, I mean the approach for the catalyst, and I think as has been discussed quite a lot in this conference, is that it's not just about carbon. We talk about outcome-based payments, but the sort of the approach of the catalyst is really to work at a landscape scale. So we're not talking about one type of intervention for restoration, first of all. So already the financing will be different across what the different types of intervention that we're talking about. And so we're very much looking at developing blended finance models. So we're talking about accessing public funds, also still accessing funds, from philanthropy that do also typically fund restoration landscapes, but looking towards developing those revenue streams that are sustainable long term. So beyond the philanthropic funding into supply chain outcomes of developing agroforestry, and sort of improving livelihoods in a way that we can develop the restoration supply chain as well, because of course there's financing that required into that, but it can become sustainable in itself. So yeah, it's really looking at the blended approach. And one of the key things that the Catalyst is aiming to do is also make sure that we have the governance structures in place to manage all those different revenue streams at the landscape scale in a coordinated manner, which is quite a big challenge, but we're giving it a go.
Thank you very much. Question for Annalisa next. Annalisa, do you know, there's obviously been shown you lots of impacts in terms of the sort of flood and drought management with your agroforestry. Do you know if there's been impact on species diversity with the incorporation of agroforestry, and does that depend on the particular trees and management that's involved with these management systems?
Thank you, Jen. I think I answered that question in the chat, but I'll just say it. These irrigation schemes that were set up, this agricultural land, have been there for more than 40 years because it was something that has been set up very long ago by the government. And so primarily right now, these areas are referred to as agricultural land. So I may not have been focusing on the species diversity and checking the difference, but definitely if you go more than, let's say, 60 years before all these things were set up, there will be a change in diversity when you look at those areas compared to areas that were not set up for agriculture. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. We've got a little bit more time, so let's go for one for Juliana. So did you find different responses from the young people that you work with who live in different biomes or from social demographies? And was there anything surprising that you weren't expecting in terms of how that the children and young people you have engaged with have reacted?
What's surprising is that they are already, we underestimate as adults and professionals how they are connected with the planet and Earth and all the beings. And so they feel they are part of nature, they are not segregated from it, and we are not giving them chance to raise their voices and input their insights and super creative, no boundaries, no limits perception on how we can create a better environment for our living condition, our living in a prosperous and harmonic way with all nature-based relations we have to the planet. So it's, I just ask, if I have to say something, give chance for the children and adolescents to participate more, include their voices, their perception. It will change our planet for sure.
Thanks very much. So great. All right, do we have time for one more? I've got another question for Iris here. What was the timescale of the bird biodiversity increases, and how many years were the measurements made after the initiation of the programs?
So we selected farmers that had transitioned at least 3 years prior, but usually more like 5. So yeah, the program, well, the government-led ZBNF program started in 2016. And so we tried to find as well, the biggest challenge was actually finding areas that were continuously managed under ZBNF, because often farmers would, trial them in half the field or one of the fields. So actually finding these, larger continuous areas which you need for biodiversity, especially birds, was a challenge. So, but yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I think I might wrap it up there so that people who want to rush off to in-person talks next can do so. Thank you very much for your poster contributions. That was really fascinating stuff. And if the audience would like to get in touch with any of the speakers, the LinkedIn group is available for everybody to connect. And hopefully, I don't know if there are specific questions in the chat that the speakers would like to respond to with direct messaging. Please feel free to do that. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.